The first person Evelyn Rowan noticed wasn't the wealthy rancher standing beside the stone fireplace. It was the young man in the wheeled chair. Everyone else in the great room seemed careful around him. Too careful. One ranch hand hurried to move a chair out of his way before being asked. Another reached for a stack of ledgers. The young man had already begun lifting himself. The young man thanked them politely, then quietly did the work on his own anyway. Evelyn recognized the look in his eyes immediately. Not frustration. Weariness. The exhaustion that came from people confusing capability with limitation. She lowered her own travel satchel beside the door and pretended not to notice. Outside, rain hammered against the ranch house windows. The swollen Elk River had washed away the only bridge leading east. Every traveler in Dry Creek Crossing was stranded until the flood receded. Evelyn expected little more than a corner in the stable for the night. Instead, the ranch owner himself had invited her inside. She still wasn't entirely certain why. The widower crossed the room with measured confidence. His name, she'd learned only moments earlier, was Thaddeus Mercer. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver beginning to touch the edges of his dark beard. The sort of man whose quiet voice carried farther than another man's shouting. He stopped near the dining table. "My housekeeper insists no one should face this storm outdoors." Evelyn inclined her head. "Please thank her for me. Our housekeeper retired last winter." She blinked. Then, "My cook insisted." For the briefest moment, one corner of Thaddeus's mouth lifted. Not quite a smile. Perhaps the memory of one. 3 days earlier, Evelyn had still believed she could reach Denver before autumn. She carried careful plans folded inside her leather satchel. Letters of recommendation from merchants, employment references, a small sewing roll, her father's pocket watch, and the weathered family Bible he'd placed in her hands shortly before his passing. What she no longer carried was a home. Her father's illness had consumed nearly every savings they possessed. When creditors finally arrived, there had been little left to sell except the house itself. Neighbors suggested marriage. Practical marriage. Convenient marriage. One gentleman offered to clear every debt she owed. In exchange, she would spend the rest of her life decorating a home where he had already explained she needn't concern herself with conversation. She politely declined. Better uncertainty than becoming another piece of furniture. So she traveled west, looking for honest work. Nothing more. The flood had simply interrupted the journey. "I only need somewhere dry until the roads reopen," she told Thaddeus. "The stable would be more than enough." Thaddeus looked genuinely puzzled. "You expect to sleep beside horses? I've had worse accommodations. You'll stay in the east guest room." I couldn't impose. It wasn't a question. His tone wasn't harsh, merely settled. The discussion, apparently, had ended. Dinner that evening felt strangely formal despite there being only 3 people at the long walnut table. Thaddeus sat at one end. The young man in the wheeled chair occupied the other. Evelyn quietly accepted the remaining place. The silence lasted almost an entire minute. Finally, the younger man closed the estate ledger resting across his lap. "My apologies. I should introduce myself. I'm Lucien Mercer. Evelyn Rowan. You've traveled alone? Since April. That's uncommon. So I've been told." His eyes studied her for another moment. Not suspiciously, curiously. "You don't appear frightened." "I've discovered fear rarely improves difficult situations." Something about that answer earned the faintest hint of approval. "I'll remember that." Breakfast began before sunrise. Unlike most prosperous ranches, Mercer Ridge never woke slowly. Account books appeared before coffee. Contracts before conversation. Lucien was already reviewing cattle prices when Evelyn entered the dining room. He wrote quickly, confidently. Columns of figures covered several open ledgers. One page contained livestock counts. Another tracked payroll. Another listed rail shipments due before winter. Evelyn paused. "You're managing all of this?" Lucien looked up. "Most people assume otherwise. I asked because your handwriting is remarkably organized." He laughed quietly. "That's considerably nicer than assuming my father does everything." Before either could continue, a foreman entered carrying several invoices. He stopped beside Lucien. "Mr. Mercer, where should these go?" Lucien accepted them. "Top drawer." "No." He frowned. "Second drawer." He reached toward a cabinet. The folders had been rearranged. He searched another shelf. Then another. Nothing. Without thinking, Evelyn stepped closer. "I can help." She stopped herself. "If you'd like me to." Not because she believed he couldn't. Because everyone deserves the chance to answer for themselves. Lucian looked at her, then nodded once. The blue ledger marked East Grazing. She searched exactly where he described. Nothing. Instead of continuing randomly, she asked, "Has someone reorganized this room recently?" "Our new clerk." He filed by paper size. Lucian sighed, which explains why nothing has been where it belongs for 2 weeks. Evelyn smiled gently. "Would you object if I relabeled everything? You enjoy organizing?" "My father believed paperwork should never waste anyone's time." An hour later, every shelf carried neat handwritten labels. Financial records, land deeds, payroll, livestock, correspondence, contracts. Lucian opened one drawer, then another. Everything appeared exactly where logic suggested it should. He looked at Evelyn. "I've been searching for that grazing ledger for 6 days. It took you less than 10 minutes. She shrugged. "I dislike making people hunt for answers." For the first time that morning, Lucian smiled openly. The Mercer estate functioned with remarkable efficiency. Meals arrived on time. Payroll never failed. Livestock sales increased every season. Yet something invisible remained broken. Evelyn noticed it during supper. The dining room held 4 chairs. Only 3 were used. Each evening the cook instinctively prepared tea for 2 beside Thaddeus. 1 cup remained untouched until it grew cold. No one mentioned it. After dinner, Evelyn wandered quietly through the sitting room. Near the piano stood a framed portrait, a graceful woman smiling beneath a broad summer hat. Fresh dust covered the frame, but the flowers beside it had long since dried. She quietly carried the vase outside, gathered late-blooming golden asters from the garden, returned, replaced every brittle stem with fresh blossoms. She expected no one to notice. Turning toward the hallway, she nearly collided with Thaddeus. He looked from her to the flowers. "My wife planted those. They're still beautiful. No one's replaced them since spring. I hope you don't mind." He remained silent for several long moments. Finally he answered, "I don't." Across the room, Lucian watched without interrupting. Later that evening, he found Evelyn carefully updating the new filing labels she'd created earlier. "You've changed more in 1 day than my clerk managed all summer." She laughed softly. "I only enjoy putting scattered things back where they belong." Lucian looked toward the family portrait. "So I've noticed." Before she could answer, voices drifted in through the open window. 2 ranch hands arguing over feed deliveries, neither willing to compromise. Evelyn quietly stepped outside. She listened, asked each man 2 simple questions, then calmly pointed out they'd been discussing different shipment dates the entire time. Within minutes they were shaking hands. The disagreement disappeared. Lucian watched from the porch. His father stepped beside him. Neither spoke for a while. Finally Thaddeus said quietly, "This house has been missing something." Lucian kept watching Evelyn as she disappeared back toward the guest room, carrying nothing but her father's old pocket watch and a lantern. "I don't think," he replied thoughtfully. "It's been missing a thing. It's been missing a person." Morning sunlight spread across Mercer Ridge 4 days after the flood had cut every road leading east. The river still raged below the washed-out bridge. No wagons could cross. No stagecoach dared attempt it. For Evelyn Rowan, that meant another morning beneath the Mercer roof. She wasn't comfortable with that. Every extra day felt like another favor she had no right to accept. So she worked. Before dawn, she helped the cook prepare breakfast. She mended 2 torn aprons. She reorganized the pantry shelves so flour, sugar, coffee, and dried beans could be found without searching. By the time the ranch hands came inside, breakfast was already waiting. Nobody had asked her to do any of it. She simply couldn't bear sitting idle while others carried the burden. Later that afternoon, Thaddeus Mercer stood silently outside the office doorway. Inside, Lucian was reviewing cattle contracts while Evelyn quietly copied damaged invoices onto fresh paper before the fading ink disappeared forever. They barely spoke. Occasionally Lucian asked for a document. Evelyn handed him exactly the right one. Occasionally she asked where another record belonged. He answered without looking up. The work flowed naturally, like 2 people who had somehow spent years working together instead of days. Thaddeus watched longer than he intended. Finally Lucian looked toward the doorway. "Father, I didn't hear you. I wasn't trying to interrupt. You've been standing there several minutes." "So it appears." Evelyn rose politely. "I'll leave you both to your work." "No." Thaddeus's voice remained calm. "Please stay." She hesitated before sitting once more. The room became unusually quiet. The older rancher folded his hands behind his back, then spoke with deliberate care. Miss Rowan, you've been in this house less than a week. She nodded. I know. And yet, the kitchen is calmer. The office runs smoother. The ranch hands argue less. The cook smiles again. Evelyn looked down. I've only tried to be useful. Exactly. That evening, after supper, Thaddeus asked whether she would join him in the sitting room. A fire crackled softly beneath the stone chimney. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. The unused teacup still rested beside the fireplace exactly where it always had. Evelyn accepted the chair opposite him. You wish to speak? I did. He poured tea into both cups before answering. My wife had a gift. What kind? She could make every person who entered this house feel as though they'd always belonged here. He stared quietly into the fire. When she died, the ranch survived. The family didn't. Silence settled between them. Finally, he looked toward Evelyn. I believe you've noticed. She answered honestly. Yes. I've also noticed no one stopped loving her. No. They simply stopped living. His eyes softened. That's exactly right. Thaddeus leaned forward. I've spent years trying to solve that. With more work. More cattle. More land. Longer days. He smiled faintly. Turns out none of those things make a house feel occupied. Evelyn listened without interrupting. Then came the sentence she never expected to hear. You deserve a home. She blinked. I'm sorry. You've spent months searching for somewhere to begin again. She remained silent. And this ranch needs someone capable of restoring what grief slowly erased. She stared at him. Surely she had misunderstood. He continued. I would like to ask you to marry me. The room became perfectly still. Even the fire seemed quieter. Evelyn looked at him in complete disbelief. I've known you less than a week. I know. You hardly know me. I know enough. You've mistaken gratitude for affection. No. I've mistaken character for character. She struggled to find words. I don't understand. This isn't a proposal built on romance. It's built on respect. I believe affection grows best after trust. I already trust yours. Before Evelyn could answer, another voice quietly entered the room. I cannot allow you to accept because of me. Lucien had wheeled himself into the doorway unnoticed. His estate ledger still rested across his lap. He looked first at his father, then at Evelyn. My father believes this house needs its center restored. He isn't wrong. But I won't become the reason someone gives away her future. Thaddeus frowned. No one said that. You didn't need to. Lucien turned toward Evelyn. If you think I'm looking for someone to care for me, please don't. I've spent 8 years proving I can manage my own life. I won't have that undone. Evelyn crossed the room until she stood beside him. Not behind him. Not above him. Beside him. She met his eyes. I never thought that. You didn't. I noticed your ledger before I noticed your chair. Lucien searched her face. She continued quietly. I've watched everyone else rush to help you. I noticed something different. What? You only ask for assistance when assistance actually makes sense. A slow smile appeared. So you were paying attention. I was. He laughed softly. I suppose that's dangerous. The next morning, Lucien invited Evelyn onto the wide back porch overlooking the lower pastures. Mist drifted across the valley. Cattle grazed peacefully beyond the cottonwoods. He rested the ledger across his lap once more. I owe you an explanation. You don't owe me anything. I think I do. He looked toward the horizon. My father isn't searching for a nurse. I suspected that. He's searching for someone this ranch can lean on after he's gone. I've handled business since I was 19. I can negotiate contracts. Win lawsuits. Run 80,000 acres. But none of that teaches a family how to heal. Evelyn listened quietly. My mother did that. When she died, everyone kept working. No one kept living. After several moments, she asked softly, and what do you want? Lucien answered without hesitation. I want someone who speaks to me the way you already have. How's that? As though the chair is simply another piece of furniture. She smiled. I've met enough extraordinary people to know every life looks different. He nodded slowly. Then perhaps you understand this family better than any of us expected. 3 evenings later, the river finally began falling. The road would reopen within days. Evelyn packed her satchel, folded her dresses, wrapped her father's watch carefully inside a handkerchief. There came a knock. Thaddeus stood outside her guest room. I imagine you're preparing to leave. I am. I won't ask again. She looked up. But before you go, I'd like you to know the proposal remains. She took a long breath. If I accepted, it would have to be on my terms. He smiled for the first time in days. I was hoping you'd say that. She met his gaze steadily. I won't pretend affection. I won't become anyone's caretaker. I'll earn my place. I'll help manage this household. And Lucien's decisions will always remain Lucien's. Thaddeus extended his hand. I accept every condition. She looked at it for several seconds, then slowly placed her hand in his. Not because she had found certainty, but because, for the first time since losing everything, she had found a place where respect had arrived before expectation. By the end of the week, the little church overlooking Dry Creek Crossing filled quietly with ranch hands, neighbors, merchants, and old friends. There were no extravagant decorations, no orchestra, no lavish feast. Only honest vows spoken between two adults choosing hope over loneliness. When the ceremony ended, Lucien wheeled himself toward the church door and smiled at Evelyn. Welcome home, Mrs. Mercer. The marriage contract remained folded inside Thaddeus Mercer's desk drawer. Neither he nor Evelyn mentioned it during the first months of their marriage. There was work to do. Spring calves arrived early. Fence lines needed rebuilding after the winter storms. Rail shipments increased. The ranch continued moving forward, just as it always had. Only now, it felt different. Every morning the dining room filled with conversation instead of silence. The cook no longer hurried away after serving breakfast. Ranch foremen lingered over coffee, discussing weather, cattle prices, and the coming branding season. The piano that had sat untouched for nearly 7 years finally echoed through the house again. One evening, Evelyn quietly lifted the faded cover from its keys. I haven't played in years, she admitted. Thaddeus smiled from across the room. I don't imagine the piano minds waiting. She laughed softly before pressing the first notes. The melody was simple, gentle, yet before it ended, every servant within earshot had paused to listen. Lucien looked up from his ledger. I'd forgotten this room was built to carry music. Evelyn glanced toward him. Perhaps houses remember before people do. Life slowly settled into an easy rhythm. Evelyn never attempted to replace the woman whose portrait still hung above the fireplace. Instead, she honored her. Fresh flowers appeared every Monday. The children's storybooks that had belonged to Mrs. Mercer were carefully dusted and arranged inside the library instead of remaining boxed away in the attic. Visitors noticed. One elderly neighbor quietly remarked, "It finally feels like someone is caring for the memories instead of hiding from them." Thaddeus heard the comment. He said nothing. But later that evening, he found Evelyn trimming roses beneath the porch. I've never thanked you. She looked up. For what? For understanding that love isn't replaced. It's continued. She smiled. I never came here to erase anyone. I know. You've reminded us of that. Lucien flourished under the new routine. Evelyn never interrupted his work, never hovered, never insisted on helping where none was needed. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions. How do you decide when to sell cattle? Why do buyers trust your contracts? What makes one pasture better than another after heavy rain? Lucien enjoyed explaining. Soon evenings became long conversations over maps, ledgers, and survey records. One afternoon he surprised Thaddeus. I've asked Mrs. Mercer to oversee the correspondence with Eastern investors. Thaddeus raised an eyebrow. You trust her that much? Lucien smiled. I trust her spelling more than mine. For the first time in years, the office door remained open. Ideas flowed freely. The ranch prospered. Late that summer, trouble arrived in the form of polished boots and expensive suits. 3 businessmen stepped from a black carriage bearing documents stamped with Denver legal seals. Their spokesman introduced himself as Cyrus Bellamy, representative of a growing land syndicate. We've come regarding succession. Thaddeus invited them inside. The meeting began politely. It did not remain that way. Bellamy unfolded several contracts. Our investors have concerns. What concerns? The future stability of Mercer Ridge. Thaddeus's expression hardened. Our operation has never missed a payment. This isn't about finances. Bellamy glanced toward Lucien. It's about leadership. Silence filled the office. Finally, Bellamy continued. Some investors believe a ranch this size requires stronger physical management. The implication landed exactly as intended. Lucien quietly closed his ledger. I see. Bellamy smiled as though he'd already won. We're prepared to purchase nearly 20,000 acres immediately. Below market value, of course. It would simplify your succession concerns. Before Thaddeus could answer, Lucien calmly opened another ledger. I have a question. Bellamy nodded. Lucien slid 3 financial reports across the desk. Which one shows instability? Bellamy frowned. The figures aren't the point. They're precisely the point. Lucien opened another book. Our profits increased 17%. He opened another. Cattle mortality decreased. Another. Debt eliminated. Another. Land value doubled. Bellamy shifted uncomfortably. Lucien continued. You've mistaken wheels for weakness. And that's a costly mistake. Bellamy wasn't finished. He produced another folded map. These Western grazing rights were never properly transferred. If challenged, your ownership could collapse. Evelyn quietly reached toward a cabinet. No. She smiled politely. Those records aren't there anymore. Bellamy looked confused. She walked directly to the reorganized archive, removed one leather folder, opened it. Inside rested the original transfer documents signed 23 years earlier. Alongside them, the county survey, witness statements, tax receipts, railway filings, everything. She placed the papers before Bellamy. You were looking for page 7. I believe page 8 answers your concern. The room became perfectly silent. Bellamy slowly read each document. His confidence disappeared. Lucien folded his hands. I indexed those files. Mrs. Mercer improved the system. So thank you. You've reminded us why organization matters. Bellamy carefully gathered his papers. I appear to have underestimated this household. Thaddeus finally spoke. Yes, you did. The businessmen departed before sunset. They never returned. Word spread quickly across the county. Not that the Mercers had won. That Lucien himself had dismantled every legal challenge without raising his voice once. The story traveled farther than any cattle shipment. People stopped describing him as the rancher's disabled son. They simply called him the finest businessman in the territory. Autumn arrived painted in gold. Harvest celebrations filled the valley. Neighbors gathered beneath strings of lanterns for the annual ranch supper. Young cowboys laughed around bonfires. Families filled long wooden tables. During the evening meal, a newly hired ranch hand nervously approached Evelyn. He couldn't have been older than 23. He removed his hat. Mrs. Mercer. Yes. I just wanted to thank you. For what? When I first came here, I didn't know anyone. You remembered my name. You asked whether I'd eaten. He smiled shyly. My own mother passed years ago. He looked toward the crowded tables. I reckon this place feels like it has won again. Before Evelyn could answer, Lucien had heard every word. Later that night, while guests drifted home beneath starlight, he joined her on the porch. You've been thinking. I have. What about? The ranch hand. Evelyn sighed. I never wanted anyone to think I replaced your mother. Lucien smiled gently. I don't. She looked toward him. When people call you the heart of this ranch, they aren't talking about replacing her. They're talking about what you've built. He paused. My mother taught us how to love. You reminded us how to keep loving. For a long moment, neither spoke. Winter arrived exactly 1 year after Evelyn first crossed the flooded bridge. The marriage contract still rested untouched inside Thaddeus's desk. He removed it one snowy evening, carried it into the sitting room, placed it quietly into the fireplace. The paper curled slowly beneath the flames. Evelyn looked up. You didn't even read it. I didn't need to. He smiled warmly. It served its purpose. She crossed the room. And what purpose was that? It brought you home. Lucien rolled quietly into the room carrying a polished wooden tray. Upon it rested 3 teacups. Not 2. 3. He placed one beside his father, one before Evelyn, then poured tea for himself before settling beside them. His eyes drifted toward the portrait of his late mother. No one's replacing anyone. He smiled. We've simply made room. Outside, snow settled softly across Mercer Ridge. Lantern light glowed warmly through every window. Laughter echoed from the kitchen. The piano played once more. The ranch prospered, not because of larger herds, not because of richer land, but because 3 lonely people had discovered that family was never something written into a contract. It was something chosen. Every single day,